This is all intelligence-driven operation. There's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes to actually detect vessels, to detect submersible and semi-submersible vessels as well. These are submarines bringing tons and tons of cocaine and other drugs into this continent,
These are
U.S.
homemade submarines.
Homemade submarines that are made in the middle of the jungle, triple canopy, in some
Unbelievable.
riverine, and the material somehow gets into is transported into the jungle on donkeys and backs and horses, and the motors and all the material, the fiberglass, and they sail these things out of there and start heading this way.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to our next episode here on Game of Crimes with Murph in the Morning. God bless you, folks. Thank you so much for coming back every week. You know, I hate to keep saying it, but I don't know what's wrong with you people that you keep coming back, but I love you because you do. If you haven't had a chance to watch this on YouTube yet, do me a favor, go over to Game of Crimes podcast on YouTube, click on subscribe, listen to the posts, click those like buttons, make comments, support us here on Game of Crimes. We're trying to blow that thing up this year. So appreciate your support. But like I do every week, I have another special guest on today. You can see this young man sitting in front of us here. He and I have been friends since back in, I guess, the late 1980s. He's a former DEA agent, retired. He's a U.S. Navy veteran. He was a member of the NCIS. I think they made TV shows about him on television. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But it's my pleasure to welcome Jaime Forza to the show. Jaime, thank you so much, brother, for coming on Game of Crimes.
Good morning, Steve, and thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Man, look at you. You're still hitting the gym. I can see the muscles. You're just a stud sitting there.
Tried to fight father time, and I was calculating. I have known you for over 35 years.
Is
That's a
that
long
right?
time.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I just want to say that you're the same solid guy I've known for all those years. So
Oh, thank you, man. I want you guys to know I didn't pay him to say that. I just, but I do
I really
appreciate
mean
it.
it.
It's very humbling. And I got to tell you, man, in any profession, if your colleagues like you and they still think highly of you, that's a true sign of respect. And I'm honored that you'd say something like that, man. I may blush here in a minute. So,
Well, I really mean it. I mean what I say.
well, thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Jaime. And that's why I invite him on the show because he'll tell you good things about me. All right. And before we go any further, I want to throw this out here real quick. And my iPad turned off on me because Jaime has written his first book. And we're going to talk about it later, but this is his book, The Rules of Congo. And if you don't know what Congo is, let me tell you, you got to check this book out. And I'll be honest with you, I told Jaime, and I hadn't finished reading this one, the scariest damn books I ever read in my life. There were times when I was saying prayers afterwards, Lord, don't let me have bad dreams tonight. It is one scary book. But
there is some mysticism to the book. Yes, sir.
But you know what? It deals with what you and I faced when we were in Miami. And I'll just quickly say it involves the Santeria religion as well as what's the other African religion?
Palo Mayombe, which is what they call the dark side or evil twin of Santeria.
If you're interested in that kind of stuff, not because you want to become a member of those religions, but if you just want to learn more, especially here I was a naive rookie agent, came in from West Virginia to Miami in 1987, and I couldn't even say Santeria back then, but some of the cases that we ran into where you would raid these houses, and they would have these rooms set up with statues and sheet cakes and coins and powder and all the sacrifices of cigar, things like that were laying there in front of these life-size statues and robes, skeletons. Man, it was scary. But
yes,
the
sir.
funny thing was...
I'm sorry, that's a world that lots of people do not know it even exists. And that was one of the purposes of the book, is to demonstrate some of the things that we encounter that people have no idea about.
Yeah. I always found it, I'm a little hesitant to say this now after reading the book to get the voodoo demons on me here, but it was funny because you'd hit these houses. We did a controlled delivery into a house in Miami. We were working with customs, brought it in from Haiti on a coastal freighter, watched 300 kilos go into this house. We sat on it for several days, long-term surveillance, and then cars started showing up, taking boxes of stuff out, and we'd pull them over and got our PC to go in the house. We go in there, there's an additional 250 kilos that was already in there on top of the 300 we put in there. So 550 kilos. And the man, because of his Santeria shrines and the blessings and all that going along with that, thought that we would be blinded to 550 kilograms of cocaine in that house. It just amazes me.
That is correct. And they bring their Santeria priests or Palo priests to court as well. And hopefully we'll get into that a little more. But there were a lot of priestesses and witches in the courtroom while you were testifying, tried to tie your tongue, so to speak. So when you're testifying, you will not testify against the defendant, and your words will get convoluted, and in that way protect the defendant from going to prison or being detained.
Wow. I had one trial there, and I know we're getting away from your story here, but we're going to get started here in just a second, but I always found this interesting. We went to lunch one day. It was a group of Haitian traffickers. We'd gotten 500 of coke off of them on a controlled delivery. During the lunch break, we came back in, and the marshals stopped everybody from going in the courtroom. Somebody had gone around the entire courtroom and sprinkled white powder along the perimeter of the room, so they had to bring people in and clean it all up. And it wasn't coke. I don't know what it was, but I'm sure it was some kind of magical power that was supposed to do whatever it was supposed to do. Maybe it's what made my hair fall out.
Correct. I got quite a few stories of that. You know, you look back and your suit has all been sprinkled with powder and just different things you experience while in the courtroom while you're waiting outside to come in.
And I'm pretty sure that what we're talking about now, nobody on any true crime podcast has ever talked about that kind of stuff.
And that's why I felt I had to write this book.
It's a good one. So, and again, I'll give you the sites and everything. I'll put a link on the Game of Crimes podcast.com website, and you just click on the link. It'll take you right to Amazon where you can get your own copy. And we'll talk about this again at the end also, Jaime. So, but as we do every week, we want to get into our small town police blotter because we know how many criminals who might be intellectually challenged when it comes to planning their crimes. But just to throw this disclaimer out like we do every week, this is a show about crime. We talk about bad people doing bad things. We talk about bad people doing bad things to good people. Now, we take these stories very seriously here on Game of Crimes, but we never want to miss an opportunity to have a little laugh at the expense of people who should have chosen a different career path and not become criminals. It's just amazing. And just so you know, Jaime and I both are in Florida. So we got 2 Florida stories, and you think I had a hard time finding 2 Florida stories? I didn't. So Jaime, if you'll go ahead, brother, let's get this thing rolling.
Yeah, actually, we have a very good one here, Steve, and I call it a real life Crocodile Dundee from
there you go.
Not from down under, but from Florida, as you just mentioned. And it's titled "Croc Wearing Guy Jumps into the Croc Pond at Gator Farm." And yes, this happened in Florida. So the article starts, try saying this 5 times fast. A guy wearing Crocs jumped into the crocodile pond at an alligator farm. St. Augustine's Alligator Farm Zoological Park.
I've been there.
This was a 23-year-old man who was arrested after allegedly breaking into the park Monday night and deciding to take a swim in the Nile crocodile enclosure. A neighbor called 911 at 6:50 in the morning to report this suspicious person who was only wearing his underwear crawling in the backyard near the park. So the farm itself also called 911, and a pair of Crocs and a pair of shorts were floating in the crocodile pond. And there was a bloody trail found heading to the top of a 20-foot structure near it, and a $3,000 statue had been knocked over. Now, the article doesn't say what kind of statue it was, but I can only imagine a statue of a crocodile. So when the cops located this man, he claimed that he had been bitten by an alligator. So the police put 2 and 2 together. This cat's name is Brandon Keith Hatfield, and he has been charged with burglary and criminal mischief. He also allegedly damaged part of a snack bar and toppled lamps and signs at the park before entering the Oasis on the Nile exhibit. Apparently, he jumped the 5 to 6 foot structure into about 2 feet of water. Then he climbed onto a 20-foot structure, which left a bloody trail. The park director, quote, said, "In our 125-year history, this is the first time anyone has tried to go swimming with the crocodiles."
What an idiot.
So he was allegedly at the exhibit for approximately 5 hours. He damaged the statue that could only be accessed by swimming the croc pond. So he actually did go into the pond. And then when they reviewed the security footage, it showed a 9-foot-long croc lunging at Hatfield, then locking onto his. When he escapes at the edge of the pool, he ultimately managed to fight the croc off and get away. So I think he thought he was holding an audition, like one of those shows in SeaWorld, I guess, with Shamu, but this was a croc.
Oh, sorry. I mean, what a moron.
Yeah, so that has got to go very well for him.
That's got to be one of the biggest idiots we've ever met.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness. The only thing that surprises me is that there's no mention of meth involved in this.
Well, no mention, but it's probably in his system.
You don't know this, Jaime, but the main rule we have, the number one rule here on Game of Crimes is kids don't do meth.
That's right. Or any other drug for that matter.
That's the truth. That's the truth. All right, brother. Thank you very much for reading that.
Yes,
we got another
pleasure.
one here.
Pleasure.
Another wonderful Florida story about a man dressing up in a Dalmatian onesie, okay? And he's going to take on the cops. He's pretty easy to spot, though. Now, this Florida man, he bizarrely dressed in a Dalmatian onesie, bolted during a traffic stop after being handcuffed on just one wrist. He remained on the lam for an entire day before finally being caught at, his girlfriend's house, which might be the first place cops would go to. I mean, the only other one would be if he went to his own home, but maybe that was his own home. Anyway, FHP, our Florida Highway Patrol here, they were in hot pursuit of 36-year-old Keith Devereaux. I'm going to guess Keith is from Louisiana, but that's just Murph making the summation here. They were after him for about a day. They attempted to pull him over for reckless driving just after midnight on January 27th. Devereaux had allegedly been driving erratically, and you got to love that word, allegedly, right?
Right.
The only reason you put that word in there is so you don't get sued.
That's correct. Liability.
Yep. So he's driving erratically, stopping and pulling away at high speeds while dropping off a passenger, according to the Highway Patrol. While fleeing, Devereaux eventually rammed his truck into a tree. That's the new kind of way of parking trucks here in Florida. We ram him into a tree. Not my truck. Anyway, he pulled himself out of the wreckage. He tried to keep running, but was quickly tased by pursuing troopers. And I just would love to see the video of that one where they ride the lightning bolt. Now, despite being shocked, Devereaux picked a fight with a trooper and began to push and thrash against him before once again attempting to take off. Somehow, he successfully fled. By this point now, here's what he's got so far. His truck has been wrecked, he's been tased by the troopers, and he still has one handcuffed on one wrist. And yet, he goes straight to the girlfriend's house. Okay, so the troopers watched him flee through the woods while they waited for backup. And guess what they brought in? A dog. That's bad. Brought the canine unit in. He picked up Devereaux's scent. Oh, the real dog tracked the real dog, not Devereaux in a Dalmatian suit. Took off after Devereaux, turned up at the girlfriend's house. The girlfriend was home at the time, and you're going to love this. She told troopers that she didn't want anyone to go inside, including Devereaux, because they had drugs inside and she did not want to face jail time. She admitted to this. So the troopers left. They filed an arrest warrant so police could return to the home the following day. When police arrived, they detained Devereaux. Still there. He knows the cops know where he is, and he's still there. Booked him in for reckless driving, fleeing to a law enforcement officer, resisting with violence, and, as his girlfriend had alluded to the night before, possession of methamphetamine, among other charges. You don't know this, Jaime. I've got a Patreon subscriber channel, and one of the monthly sections on there is you can't make this shit up. And these qualify. Both these stories qualify. Oh, my goodness.
Was it even Halloween that he was dressed in the Dalmatian suit? Or
no, it's January. Only in Florida, right? You know what? You probably did this same thing. You try to teach your kids to be leaders and not followers. Well, here in Florida, we like to be the leader of the dumb criminals in the United States, and I think we succeed.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, man. All right. Well, thank you, folks, for playing along.
Speaking of Halloween, I was, kind of playing around with the algorithm for the book. And, you put the EA a number of things. And what do I come across was a Steve Murphy Halloween costume. Have you seen that?
Really?
This is no kidding. No kidding. You got to look that up. And I said, I'll be damned. I said, you got to look it up.
I'm looking it up right now.
I said, you've made it when there's a Halloween costume for sale of you. I'm serious.
All right, let's see what we got.
You did not know that.
Oh, there it is. Looks like Steve Murphy.
It looks like Woody's outfit, though, from Toy Story.
Man, how about that? See, now that jacket, you're supposed to have a members only jacket. That
right.
Red, maroon color, members only.
Oh, so you did not know that, huh?
I didn't.
Wow, look at that. Look at that.
I don't check myself out too much. It's funny because I've got a little statue over here on a shelf. You know what? Hold on. Let me get it and show you. Hold on.
Okay.
All right.
Yes.
Javier's wife, Beverly, a few years ago for Christmas, got me this. This is supposed to be a Steve Murphy doll.
Wow. A Steve Murphy action figure.
Look, he even comes with his own little 9mm.
That's pretty good.
Which explains why his hands are in certain positions, because you see that hand right there? That looks like it's a little weird, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not going to put that down there. But and I think she paid like $100 for this thing.
Yeah. Wow.
Anyway, there's something else I bet nobody's ever put on their true crime podcast.
That is great success, actually. That is great success.
Oh, this is going to be a good show today. We're doing some firsts here for any true crime podcast in the world, I think, talking about some of this stuff and showing these things and telling stories. But
yes,
and that's the way it's going to go today.
Yes.
Jaime, thanks very much for playing along, man. I appreciate your sense of humor here and reading that story.
My pleasure.
So what we do with every guest that comes on is we ask you, tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, what your family dynamics were, what schools you went to, high school, college, what you majored in, and then how your life kind of progressed after school. Did you play sports? I'm pretty sure you played sports.
Yes.
Look at you, man. You look like a freaking linebacker. So I'll turn it over to you, and I'll shut up for a little bit.
Okay. Well, again, first and foremost, thank you for having me, Steve, and thank you for the support and for really recognizing the sacrifices of the military, first responders, and law enforcement, and giving them a platform to share their unique experiences. So we thank you for that and continue success.
Thank you, brother. There's lots of heroes and studs and studettes out there that need to be recognized.
And you had some of the best on your program. Some of the best.
Right now. We got one right now.
Yes, I don't know. We'll see. So actually, I'm originally from the Republic of Brooklyn, New York.
Okay. I've never heard it termed like that.
Specifically, and I'll qualify this, but from Brooklyn Heights. And the reason I have to qualify that is Brooklyn Heights now is Hollywood. It has changed dramatically. It's not the Brooklyn Heights when I grew up of the 60s and 70s, very diverse, but we lived in that area in a low-income, government-assisted living there, right? And through what they call gentrification, right, slowly inhabitants were moved out. Definition of gentrification is usually through business development and opportunities and all that. Well, our gentrification was more through a suspicious fire, what we call a mafia fire, right? Which happens in which these buildings where people have been living for a long time, all of a sudden need to evacuate. They condemn the building, and suddenly their multi-million-dollar condos are built there. So that's kind of how we moved out of the area. Kind of curious, I was with my brother a few years ago, just visiting the area, just looking how it changed. And we went to a restaurant right across from the building where we lived, what used to be a liquor store, and now just a high-end restaurant. And they set us next to Paul Giamatti, which is a very well-known Hollywood actor. Not sure you're familiar with him, but he's been in many movies. He was John Adams on HBO, Saving Private Ryan, Private Parts, just a known actor. And my brother is a photographer, so he thought we were paparazzis in the area that were following him. So, we actually spoke to him for a little bit, and then we came out. And again, the place has changed completely. And I tell my brother Johnny, I said, hey, do you remember us seeing our first body here in the corner? And he says, yeah, I can still remember the chalk outline of the gentleman that got gunned down right there in front of the liquor store. So that's how much the place has changed. We grew up in a 600 square foot apartment, 5 of us and a big German Shepherd. And just yesterday, I checked, and the apartment right across from us sold for over $1 million just recently.
Outrageous,
so that's how times change. We went to Catholic school. Catholic school offered scholarships to the poor kids of the neighborhood, 2 scholarships actually, one for the tuition and the other one for the lunch. So want to say that kind of strict upbringing with a Catholic school. This is when you had some very tough nuns that they'll look after you. By the way, one of the nuns changed my name. I remember as a very little boy, she calls me in her office and she says, "There's no such thing as a Jaime here. Your name is Jamie, and you will spell it as such." So from there on, I grew up as a Jamie. So now, I had to spell it Jaimie rather than Jaime. So I grew up as a Jamie.
I got a lot of friends that went to Catholic schools growing up, and you guys all have the same story about the nuns just kicking your butt every day. Holy cow.
Tough love, right?
You're not kidding. I mean, church is supposed to be a place of love. I guess it's tough love, right?
Right. So we're both born to my brother and I, and my sister. I have a younger sister, born to a teenage mom. And my dad worked as a longshoreman at the Naval Shipyard, Brooklyn Shipyard, which is a tough guy. That's a tough business.
Exactly the words I had in my mind was tough guy.
Tough guy. Originally, they're not part of a union, so they just stand by the fence and hope to get picked for the day. And then they have to prove themselves and gain their reputation, and then they're brought in as regular workers and part of the union. But they work long hours, and it's tough work. Tough work there. So he developed some serious medical issues from working around asbestos and asbestos-covered compartments. And so he had some very medical issues. And after we got moved out of the building, he decided to move to Puerto Rico. So we all went to Puerto Rico, and I finished my high school there. There I played baseball. If you're in Puerto Rico, you have to play baseball, and it is what we call hot ball. You have to play, and it's very intense playing. Did very well. You signed sort of a contract at 16 years old. Back then, there was no draft for Puerto Rican players. So you sign a contract just in case you're good enough and they'll have first rights. So sign a little contract with the Expos, and there was a league called Youth AA Ball, and in the hopes of something happening. Of course, that didn't materialize. I did very well in the high school, went to one of the toughest public high schools in Puerto Rico. So you can only imagine going from Catholic school to a very tough public high school in Puerto Rico where you have to fight just about every day. So I did very well there, considering it was not a great high school. So I graduated with honors. Opportunities were very limited there. Of course, accepted to University of Puerto Rico and to other universities, but didn't have the resources even to buy a ticket to go visit the university. So lo and behold, there was a Navy recruiter visiting the high school one day, and I talked to the Navy recruiter, and long story short, at 16 years old, under the delayed entry program, I signed up to go into the Navy as soon as I turned 17.
Wow.
And that was in 1979. So I know I'm dating myself a little bit here, but
hey, let me tell you, by 1979, I'd already been a cop for 4 years. Hey, but what position did you play in baseball?
I was an infielder. Second base, shortstop, third base.
That's the best spots.
Yeah, and again, a lot of competition and very good ball that's played there, usually all throughout Latin America. Of course, Dominicans rule baseball, as you know. They're very good at it.
You remember Javier Pena when he used to be the special agent in charge down in San Juan, and he had responsibility for all the Caribbean islands except for the Bahamas.
Correct.
And the baseball security guys were always coming to San Juan to meet Javier because they wanted law enforcement contacts in all the islands. And this is what I learned. When those baseball players, some of them, their families get kidnapped because the players themselves are making millions of dollars as professional baseball players.
That is correct.
And so baseball security comes in and they negotiate ransoms and getting families back. And then when the players do something stupid, they go home and they get in a fight or they get arrested or whatever, they go negotiate releases. It was very eye-opening. I never had any idea that was going on. But between Cuba and the Caribbean islands, man, there's some fantastic baseball players come out of there.
In Venezuela as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
So, wow. I never knew that about you. That's pretty interesting.
Yes. But I went the military route and used all the teaching of my parents, although their education was limited to grade school. Your best lessons are learned from people with very little education at times, right?
It's
And that
called
was the
common sense.
foundation. And that was the foundation for me doing well in the military and beyond.
Well, you know, just want to point out the obvious here, because it's a podcast show and that's what you're supposed to do. Here, you're from a poor family who are still teaching you values. They're teaching you morals. They're teaching you right from wrong. And I'm going to guess that other than them having the personal fortitude to teach their children right, there was probably nothing else special about them. They were just good, hardworking, paying Americans. Why can't we do that today? Your family did it, and look at you. You're even coming from that poor environment in New York and moving to Puerto Rico, you still excelled in your studies. You excelled in sports. Then you excelled by serving your country in the U.S. Navy. I mean, what a portrait for success is that? That's your life story right there. I mean, and we're not even getting into the good stuff yet. This is just getting you to the point.
100%. And in addition to that, we live in a country that's the only place in the world where a poor kid from Brooklyn can eventually become a senior executive in the U.S. government. And we'll get into that. You know, I excelled through the military and in law enforcement. No other place in the world can a person do that, only in the United States of America. And I'm not trying to be over dramatic, but that's the truth.
I'm with you 100%, brother. Absolutely. So now you go in the Navy. Did you get a say-so into what your occupation was going to be?
No, actually, I go in the Navy and just wasn't prepared, to be honest. I had no idea what I was doing. Had very little guidance. You know, the recruiters were kind of telling you what to do. I did good enough in the ASVAB exam. That's the entry exam, in which qualified me for the aviation field. So, which was a good thing, but I didn't even understand. You know, I wanted to go to a ship and sail the world and all that. And I was assigned to a patrol squadron, a VP squadron, which is an anti-submarine squadron. Big airplanes, P3s, so they do not go on boats. They go from one station to another, crew of 13. And I thought I got shortchanged, to be honest with you. And I would talk to other sailors. They were saying, "Are you crazy? That's the best duty you can ever have. You don't got to go to a boat, and you get to see many places." And that's exactly the way it was. So again, I'm a man of faith. I'm a Christian, and I just really believe that God blessed me all the way to this day. So I was in a great command. Met some great people that continue to help me develop as a person and learn leadership skills. And in the squadron, deployed 3 times. 2 of those times were to Sigonella, Sicily. And that gave an opportunity to go throughout Europe with the squadron and just learn about cultures and a lot of things and continue to mature. So I took advantage of the military, and I knew I had to go to school. I knew I had to go to college. And while I was back, you couldn't really study while you were overseas. And there were deployments between 6 and 8 months that you were out. So really, you had to go in person. There were no computers back then to take courses. So you actually had to sit in class. And I did so while I was back in the United States. And in my first 4 years, I managed to get 2 years of college in at what was then Florida Junior College. Now it's Florida Community College.
Wow. Is that in Jacksonville?
That's in Jacksonville. I was stationed in Jacksonville, NAS Jacksonville. Sorry, I did not mention that, but that's the home base of VP 45, Patrol Squadron 45. First, I was what they call the RAG Squadron, VP 30, and that's where you receive all your training, and then VP 45, and that's your parent squadron, and deployed 3 times, and that's what you call your sea duty for that particular assignment.
Excellent. And you did 7 years in the Navy, correct?
Well, after the first 4 years, then comes the short duty. I knew that I had to complete my bachelor's degree. So that was the moment where I had to decide whether to stay in or stay out. I was an E5 at the time, which is equivalent to a sergeant, which is a more of a popular rank, right? And I had to decide. So they were paying your E5 and above at that time. They were paying 90+% of your school. So I ended up re-enlisting and getting what they call a shore duty assignment for 3 years at NAS Cecil Field, which is another base in Jacksonville. It has since been decommissioned. but there it was at the Naval Training Facility in which they had trainers for the A7, the S3, and the F-18. That's when the Blue Angels first started flying the F-18. So I got to meet all the Blue Angel pilots there.
That's cool.
As an instructor there at that facility. So in those 3 years of shore duty, managed to go to school. Southern Illinois University had a program in which they would fly their professors into Jacksonville on weekends. So for over 2 years, I went to school on weekends to complete my undergraduate in aviation management while I was in the Navy for 7 years. And after those 7 years came the big decision whether to stay and going to an officer program, which I think I could have accomplished, or go where my real love was, which was in law enforcement.
Really?
Yes.
So did you want to be a cop since you were a kid?
I always wanted to be a cop. You know, there was a lot of cops in my old Brooklyn neighborhood, and we were always on the street. You know, we left in the morning and came back at night. You know, we were out doing what we did, actually rubbing the trash cans, looking for soda bottles to sell.
Yeah.
And get a little money for baseball cards. You'll see part of that in the book. So there was always police officers around, and without exception, I would talk to them and ask them questions and get in the car. So that was where my real passion lied.
I love it. I love it. I think since I was probably like 10 years old, I just never wanted to do anything other than be a cop.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised you didn't go back to NYPD, having grown up there in New York.
It was a thought. But things didn't work out because while I was in the Navy, then I spoke Spanish, and they were recruiting for, now it's NCIS. Back then it was NIS, Naval Investigative Service.
Mm-hmm.
And I did very well in the military, and they were trying to recruit qualified candidates that actually had some knowledge about the Navy and the inner workings in the Navy as well. So I actually was approached by NIS or NCIS recruiter to apply with them, and that's what I did. But I did it simultaneously with DEA.
And so it took a couple of years for DEA to respond, didn't it?
There was a freeze at the time, and I'll point out that I was on watch. It was a 24-hour watch that we had. And that was right after Kiki Camarena was kidnapped, eventually tortured and murdered. And that story really hit me. This is before the death of an article in Time magazine. But I read that article, and that really inspired me. He always had thoughts of FBI and all that, but had never given DEA a thought. And that's when it really hit me. And while I was on duty, I actually got the courage to pick up the phone and call the DEA office, and Ernie Batista picks up the phone.
No kidding, Ernie.
Ernie Batista was my recruiter, who was in Jacksonville at the time. Ernie Batista was in Miami first, and there were some threats on a case that he made, and then they transferred him for, I believe, safety purposes to Jacksonville. And we ended up talking, and I felt at home with him, and he got the ball rolling for me as my recruiter. And he was a recruiter for Jerry Castillo, who was a recruiter out of Miami, if you remember him, for the Miami division. So that got the ball rolling, and I applied for DEA maybe 30 days later.
Yeah, Ernie is, for our listeners, Ernie is a legend within the DEA ranks. He still is heavily involved, especially with the International Drug Enforcement Conference, what we call IDEC. He has just been phenomenal for Javier and I on the speaking business. The companies that he works for, they will sponsor us to come to like the International Association of Chiefs of Police Conference every year. I can't tell you how many smaller law enforcement conferences over the last 10 years that he's gotten us into, working with their company and kind of just standing in their vendor booth and try to bring law enforcement in to see what kind of products they have. Just think the world to Ernie. He's just an unbelievable guy. I don't think the guy ever ages. He shows up for funerals all around the country. He still travels the world. In fact, he's on the list. He says he's going to be on the show. The challenge with him is getting on his schedule because he is so busy.
Yes.
But yeah, man, you talk about a hero. That's him. And you mentioned Kiki, and just for our listeners here, you probably saw in the news recently, we're recording this in early March, and it'll come out here in a few weeks. But you probably saw in the news recently where 29 Mexican fugitives were extradited to the United States. In our book, the lead one was Rafael Caro Quintero. They call him RCQ. He is the prick who orchestrated the kidnapping, torture, and repeated murders of our agent Enrique Kiki Camarena. I've seen the pictures. I may tear up here on this one because it was our brother that was killed in the line of duty there. The things that they did to him were unspeakable. For him to finally be here in the United States to face our justice, what a home run hit. And to DEA and portions of DOJ, thank you for never giving up. That's what I love about DEA, man. I will toot their praises until the day I die. I bleed blue just like you do, Jaime. And so I'm going to have a special on the Patreon side, just go over Kiki's case and what really happened. I know I've met his son, I've met his mom, I've met his wife over the years, just fantastic people. His son is a district court judge out in San Diego.
That is correct.
I mean, the man wanted to be a cop, and he was talked out of it, thank God, because he has a much stronger role, I guess would be a nice way to say it, in what he does. Sorry to go off on a tangent, but just have to recognize Kiki for his bravery, for standing up and doing what was right in making the ultimate sacrifice. I mean, these devils, these evil people that kidnapped him, killed him a total of 3 times. They had a doctor on standby that continually injected adrenaline directly into his heart to start his heart again so they could kill him again. It's just horrific. Right. And one of the other things, gosh, I'm really getting off on a tangent, but that's how important it is to us. And I say us, I'm talking Jaime, I'm talking every DEA employee in the world, past, present. There's a lady that wrote a book called Desperados, Elaine Shannon. I'm reaching out to Elaine to see if I can bring her on, because the book is hardback, is like, 3 inches thick. But she did exhaustive research on what happened on Kiki, and we'll just get her on the show to talk about it. So we want to honor Kiki's legacy here. But thank you very much for bringing that up. It's encouraging to hear you say that that's what motivated you to become an agent, because I didn't know that part.
Yeah, and 10 years later, I walked the same streets that Kiki walked in Guadalajara. I wasn't stationed in Guadalajara, and we'll probably get into that. But I was stationed in Mexico for 6 years, and it's just kind of strange how life comes around, right? And I actually crossed the same street where he actually got kidnapped. So it was an honor to follow his steps.
Absolutely.
And back to Ernie, I still stay in touch with Ernie, actually.
Yeah.
And I had the honor of having Ernie at my retirement when I retired in 2018. So after that, we stayed friends forever, actually.
Yeah. I mean, that's just Ernie, a true American hero.
He's one of those guys that live forever, to be honest.
Let's hope so. Let's pray that he does, So you finally, in 1989, you get the call. Hey, Jaime, come and join the forces of the Drug Enforcement Administration, right?
Yeah, 87, as I mentioned, with NIS. It did well there, and somehow my package resurfaced in 1989, and I got the offer to come over with EA. And again, that's where my heart truly lied, and I did accept the position as a special agent and went back to training, right? I went to the FLETC, Florida Law Enforcement Training Center with NCIS, and 15 months later, I had to go back to training to the FBI Academy when I accepted the position.
Well, we call that the DEA Academy that the FBI occupies.
That's correct. Yes.
Now, did you hire on in Charleston, South Carolina? Was that right?
Well, I hired out of Miami, right? Because Miami processed me, interviewed me, and I was in touch with them. But I was stationed in Charleston, South Carolina at the naval base there with NCIS. So you had to report like to your nearest office at the time, and Charleston, South Carolina was that office. So I did report there before leaving. And then after training, I returned to Charleston and worked there for a little while because funding was not available at the time to move me to Miami. And since I was prior federal, you received the whole package. So I had to work in Charleston for a little while.
Not a bad place.
No, it's a great place, great experience, and great agents there at the time in Charleston.
That was when I came back from South America. I was originally selected to go to Charleston, and I was tickled to death. Connie and I were very happy about that. And then there was a hardship transfer that you and I both know. I won't mention his name on the show here, but he owns a very successful company now, worldwide company. And his daughter had some medical problems, and they had a children's hospital there that specialized in her condition. So they declined my transfer and gave him the slot, which was fine. And that's how I ended up in North Carolina. So now you're out of Charleston, you've reported to Miami, and your first permanent post with DEA, right? And this was in when,
1989.
1989.
Correct.
So Still somewhat of the Wild West back then. That's the year, if you remember. Were you there when Kevin Stevens got shot, my partner?
Yes, I was. Yes, I was.
Yeah. So
very much so the Wild West.
Still crazy times back then. What enforcement group did they assign you to?
I went immediately to Enforcement Group 1.
Okay.
Mike Vigil was the group supervisor. Famous
Mark
Mike
Boomar's
Vigil.
in there.
Mark Boomar.
Sean Johnson.
Sean Johnson.
Yeah.
Bruce Baldwin.
Yep. Good people, man.
Just a lot of good people there. It was a very, very, very good group. Reggie Gage, if you remember Reggie.
Oh, yeah.
And I was in Group 1 until I left Miami. So I was lucky enough to stay in that group the whole time I was in Miami.
Now, you're a Spanish speaker, and I know this is going to be strange when we say this to our listeners here, but in the late 80s, believe it or not, DEA, which we had about 200 agents in the Miami office alone, how many Spanish speakers did we have?
I would have to say a handful, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe 3 or 4.
Not too many. Not too many. Which means you get, don't mean to use that word, but prostituted out to all the groups to help with interviews, to help with Undercover, to help translate. And you knew you didn't want to say no to anyone. Yeah. It was a lot of work, but at the same time, people appreciate it, and you gain a lot of experience that way, actually, in a very short period of time.
And so what role were you playing at time working undercover in Miami, South Florida?
Well, different roles, right? In Miami, it's land, air, and sea. So there was roles as a transporter. There's a role as distributor, as a purchaser, as a bodyguard, as a hitman. So there was distinct roles. There was everything going on in Miami at the time. And so you assumed that role. Mm-hmm. And hopefully you had the experience, which you should learn your undercover experience by pairing up with a more experienced undercover officer, which happened at times. And other times you were just on your own, learning by just, unfortunately, making mistakes. Right. And hopefully there were not mistakes that would have a high price. But that was very frequent, very frequent.
And that was my next question is how did DEA prepare you? Because it's the same way, I mean, you went to the academy 2 years after I did. I mean, what they prepare you to work undercover is extremely minimal.
I agree.
It's 100%. Like on-the-job training, just like you said.
That's correct. And really what prepared me for undercover, I go back to Brooklyn, to be honest with you. Although you're not learning undercover skills, but you're learning street wit somewhat, right? Mm-hmm. And you are developing those instincts in which you apply to very phases and very aspects of life. Although you're not really identifying it at the time, you put it into practice later on while working undercover. But again, like you mentioned, the training at the academy was minimal.
And we're not putting down their academy by any means. I love what they do there, but that's just the cold, hard facts. And you look at FBI, you look at ATF, they have undercover training that you actually go through, and it's like months long. It's not something you go do in a 5-day class. But I don't understand this, why we never did that in DEA, but we still make the biggest cases. We've got people with the biggest huevos out there that are willing to go try this. I mean, even this redneck hillbilly here, I was working undercover in Miami, and I'm thinking, I know I look like a cop. If people are willing to deal with me, anybody in DEA could do it. So tell us, what was your most dangerous situation that you got into working undercover? Did you ever have a gun stuck to your head, things like that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Had more than one situation, quite frankly. Believe it or not, one situation was with NCIS while I was working undercover trying to develop an informant, and it was a female, and she was a prostitute and trying to develop her, and she had someone who was kind of infatuated with her or a lover, not sure what it was. And this guy came right to me and put a gun to my chest, and just more out of jealousy than anything else. Then there was another cover in which they were actually planning to rip us off in Miami. And that was a very, very precarious situation there as well. Kind of a long story how that went about, but I did a case in which working with the organization, but within the organization, there were some jealousies as to who was getting what amount of money and whatnot. And a member of that organization turns on them. So when we were going to do the controlled delivery, she set it up like to rip off his own load or rip off the part of the load of the other members of the organization. So unfortunately, there was a couple law enforcement officers involved, and it was a little bit of a shooting happened during that situation as well. And
a little bit of
a
shooting.
little shooting because
Let's define that
not
before
that many
us.
shots fired as
A little
opposed to.
Oh my gosh!
And
Any good guys hit? Any bad guys hit?
no, they said no one was hit. They surrendered, right? They surrendered after some shots flew in the middle of Hialeah, by the way. And there was a case that came about. There was kind of touch upon this book as well, because as you know, we'll talk a little bit about the book, but it's inspired, not based, but inspired by true events. And this is one of the events that I kind of touched upon.
Wow. That's only a DEA guy would explain it like that. A little bit of a shoot. Not a big shoot, just a little bit. I love it. Did you always portray yourself as a buyer, or were you sometimes being a seller of drugs?
I would say both, right? More of a buyer, more of a transporter. And DEA, we work big cases, right? And then I'm not disparaging any small time buys or anything. So you look at it more from the business aspect, where you're dealing with command and control or with cell heads or major lieutenants.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of a business. So you're talking big numbers, you're talking transportation, you're talking about distribution, payments, deliveries, and more of the big higher level thinking, let's call it, or organizing of the drug transaction itself.
Were you married at this time?
Yes, I was. Yes,
children?
I was. And it
children
takes somebody very special to be married to. That would put up with so much, right?
I refer to our spouses as the unsung heroes, because we think we're out running and gunning and we're just actually having fun. I know it sounds strange to say it like that, to face danger and people with guns and shootings and so forth, but we always felt like we were serving our country and willing to face that danger, and left our families at home, and they got to take care of everything at home, and they don't know when we're coming home or if we're coming home. And the children, you're missing all these events with your family. It's amazing. So that's our unsung heroes. We always give them a shout out. But did you have children yet at that time?
I had one daughter at the time when I was in Miami, and then I was transferred to Mexico in 1996, and my other two children were born while we were in Mexico. Of course, we came back to the States. The babies were born, and then they returned back to Mexico, but we had our first daughter when I was in Miami.
Yeah, and just before we go to Mexico, you were involved in Operation Just Cause, right?
That is correct.
Now, explain for our listeners what that was and what your role was, please.
Yeah, that was U.S. military under President Bush Sr. There was an invasion of Panama because of a number of events. Don't want to mention that because that's getting kind of political. Mm-hmm. But the military went into that country to arrest General Manuel Noriega, and Miami had made a case on General Noriega, and he was a fugitive of justice, and DEA was holding the warrant for Noriega. So the whole thing was to topple his government and to bring General Noriega to justice. Mm-hmm. So after the invasion, the objective was Noriega was a fugitive and he fled. And the objective was to apprehend Noriega and to bring him to the United States. I did not go initially to Panama for the arrest and transfer of Noriega back to the Southern District of Florida, but went to Panama subsequently with the military for the Document Exploitation Center. Noriega had files and files and files at his home and headquarters. So we conducted a number of those searches and sat in little rooms and went through all of his files, looking for additional evidence, not only evidence, things at which we could proactively work, save lives, and prevent things from happening, because a lot of nefarious things were going on with Noriega and his government. As you know, he was convicted in the Southern District of Florida. Guy Lewis was one of the prosecutors, a dear friend, and I still speak to Guy Lewis occasionally.
Yeah, I remember Guy. When you went to Panama, was that in the role of a DEA agent or back in your naval role?
No, that was DEA agent. It was already 1990. The invasion was in late 89. So, of course, the mission continued with the searches and all the things that had to be done. So I went in early 1990 there. in support of that mission.
Got it. All right. Now, so your next stop is, you already mentioned you went to Mexico in 1996. What brought on that decision? What attracted you to go to Mexico?
Always wanted to go to Mexico, back to the Kiki days, believe it or not, Steve. Just felt like that was the calling. Sometimes you cannot explain things. I thought I had developed a pretty good reputation in Miami, that if I applied to certain places, I would have been competitive, let's put it this way. Colombia for one, and Argentina and places like that. But Mexico was the calling for some reason. Vigil was there also as a 15 in Mexico City. So I knew him as my former GS as well. And I just thought that this was a good opportunity to continue to excel and answer this call for some reason. I felt that Mexico was a place. There was a lot of things happening in Mexico at the time. The organization at the time was the Juarez Cartel back then. It wasn't Sinaloa. And Amado Carrillo Fuente, Lord of the Skies, was the biggest trafficker in the world at the time after Pablo died, and you guys took care of him. So Amado at the time became the biggest trafficker, at least in this continent.
Yeah, I just want to clarify a couple things there. You mentioned the GS. For us, that's a group supervisor, which is the first level supervisor in DEA. And then the 15 is like a second level, what we would refer to as an assistant special agent in charge. That's a GS 15 on the government payment scale. That translates into.
That is correct. And the GS, the group supervisor, is a person who either makes you or breaks you. Just for your audience, you always remember your first group supervisor, because really that's the person who defines who you're going to be, whether they support you or not. But that is your daddy. In other words, that is a person that will take care of you, that will get you home, and you depend and you trust that person. So it's a very important role. And again, Mike B. Hill being my first group supervisor. To this day, I speak to Mike B. Hill on a regular basis.
Excellent. And you never know, we might have Mike on the show here at some point. He's on television all the time. Talking about Mexican drug trafficking.
Yes, sir.
Now, so you apparently did a pretty good job. Were you in Merida? That's where you're stationed?
That's correct. Merida is in the Yucatan Peninsula, state of Yucatan. So our area of responsibility covered the entire Yucatan Peninsula. And it was at the time one of the most active geographical locations in Mexico, because Amado and the Juarez Cartel owned the peninsula. And that was kind of like the gateway of a lot of the go-fast vessels and the airplanes and everything coming from Colombia into the peninsula. I know I talked to Javier when he was still in Colombia. Not sure, when did you come out of Colombia, Steve?
94.
94?
Yeah. Okay. And now he came out in 94 also, but he went back in 99, I think it was.
Yeah, because I remember speaking to Javier when he was there, and I think he went back as a 15, as an assistant special agent in charge.
Exactly. And that's when they took down the Cali cartel.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
And all that Jaime was just talking about there, about the peninsula being controlled by the cartel, all that translates to is one of the most dangerous places you could be in Mexico at that time. So that's where he was.
It really was, but people will get the wrong impression, because that's where Cancun is, and Cozumel, and Playa del Carmen, and it's really Quintana Roo, which is that state. It's probably one of the richest states in Mexico, and it is a haven for tourism. Yeah. And that's where all these organizations were working underground. And of course, there was unfortunately a lot of relations with the whole government infrastructure in the peninsula, to include the governor of the state of Quintana Roo at the time.
The corruption down there is just, to say it's out of control is just such a misnomer. It's just so far beyond that.
It was a government-run operation, at least
Absolutely.
At the time. Yes.
And it hasn't gotten any better. I mean, now that they got a new president, and the lady, just her name, Scheinbaum? Is that her name? Yeah. I mean, that last guy, I've been interviewed on Fox and Newsmax and some of the different shows, and I've said this publicly, and I'll still say it, he's either one of the biggest crooks they ever had in Mexico, or he's the most naive president they ever had down there. the things that he came out with and said that just completely unbelievable, untrue, just somebody that if he believed what was coming out of his mouth was completely out of touch with reality. Hey, gang, this is the end of part 1. Part 2 comes out tomorrow, and you certainly don't want to miss that. In the meantime, just a reminder that Game of Crimes is now posting interview videos on YouTube. You can find those and you can subscribe at Game of Crimes Podcast. Our website is gameofcrimespodcast.com, where you'll find all our episodes, our guest book list, and more. And for more content, join us on patreon.com/gameofcrimes. I have several monthly episodes that range from silly to serious, so come on over and join the fun. In the meantime, everyone stay safe. We'll see you tomorrow for part 2.